Hey vinyl community, Jeff here again, and it's time for another one of my 10 great albums from. This time we're at 1990, and again, to remember the rules, there's no rules, to remember the guidelines that I do for these are 10 albums currently in my vinyl collection, ranked according to how I feel today that I think are great albums from the year 1990. I did find that there are a lot of great albums from 1990 that I do not have on vinyl. So if you think I'm sorely mistaken or missing something from my list, chances are you're correct. I don't own the vinyl. I mean, there were a lot of them. I'm like, I can't believe I don't have that. Can't believe I don't have that. But of the ones I do have, I found way more than I could really fit into a 10. I had to judge accordingly, and there were a lot of some of my favorites. So, I mean, 1990 was another good year of great amounts of music, and I had way more than 20 to choose from that I do have on vinyl. These are the 10 that I went with. So let's get into this. And again, you know, just fun stuff. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. I never say that, but there you go. Number 10, I mentioned their first album up on my previous list. Number 10 is Vengeance Rising, Once Dead. Now, the first Vengeance Rising album was one of the most extreme albums I had at the time, and it was probably the only band that I really got into that was that extreme, because I wasn't really into extreme music. The second album, to me, same band, it's still extreme vocally, but it was a lot more polished musically. And musically, I don't know, the first album is classic from start to finish. Every song is ingrained in my head. This album the same way, but it's a different feel, different production, better production. The songs are a little more, I don't even know how to describe it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm surprised it didn't make it higher, but it's at number 10, Vengeance Rising's second album. And of course, that was the last time with that lineup. The band left, did die happy, continued on doing music and stuff like that. So, in at number 9 is the self-titled Trouble album, you know, coming right out of Run to the Light. We love those first few albums. This one, there was some difference here. The lyrical content was different, but at the time when this came out, it just blew us away, because it's still a great album. And it was one of the hardest ones to find until they repressed it. It was expensive on vinyl. I'm glad they repressed it. I could afford it because it's absolutely one of my favorites. Now, number 8, we're cheating a little because we got 2 albums here. And it's tough because I don't really know. These albums, are they real? Are they compilations? I've read all kinds of things on them. And so I'm going to squeeze them both in here as 2 of my favorite, because they are. And they were both released in 1990. Similar artists, slightly different bands. 77 Sticks and Stones. When it came out, I seem to remember thinking it was more of a demo album. There are some demos that were on a previous album. The last few songs were their demo versions of songs that were on their self-titled third album. Yeah. But the other songs were not. I don't know where they came from exactly. There were probably extensive liner notes in here that I could read, whether they were just studio outtakes or whatever. But the album in the beginning never was considered to me to be, is an official album, or is it kind of like, here's some stuff that we had? But from start to finish, one of my absolute favorite albums by the 77s. I'm glad they reissued this on vinyl. They did a deluxe CD set before this, which had like 3 discs, all this bonus stuff, and then they released this on vinyl. Same thing. 7 and 7 is basically some of the guys from 77s, but tends to be a little more stripped down. Some of my favorite songs are on this. And again, it's got like a handful of songs. It's got some vocal rehearsal songs. It's got a live track or 2. So it's less a real album and more of a, here's a bunch of stuff we had. But the songs on here that are the studio tracks, the 4 or 5 songs that begin the album, are part of my favorite. You know, Miserable, You, The Treasure in You, Come and Gone are just, that makes it worth it. The LP reissue is actually kind of a deluxe, because it's got all of that plus some vocal rehearsals, demo versions, And then it's got a whole second album that's got, you know, other vocal rehearsals and outtakes and other scratch band, which is an early stuff, some other early recordings and stuff. So the original CD that I have from 1990, you know, has X amount of tracks, and then they released it on vinyl, and they added some bonus. And they, of course, did a super deluxe edition of this CD before this vinyl came out, and then he had even more tracks. So one of my favorite bands, the 77s, two of my favorite albums. They're all my favorites, but two that really stand out. And at number 7 is the first Slaughter album. I will admit, in 1990, I did not have this album. I got into it much later, but it has become kind of a pivotal piece of music from 1990. I still hear this on the radio. I still love some of this, you know, some of the stuff from this. I'm glad they reissued this on vinyl recently. I picked this up. I picked up the other album, and The Wildlife is coming very soon. So I'm beefing up my vinyl collection of the early Slaughter years, and this is in there for sure. Up next is Guardian's Fire and Love. This is a second Guardian album where they switch singers. I'll tell the little story, and hopefully none of the guys in the band will come back and try to refute it, but because it's true. But back in this day, we had telephones. We didn't do internet, of course. And I was one of those fans that used to occasionally track people down and talk to them. Of course, I was had a magazine for a long time, so that gave me the reason. Used to talk to Dave Bach all the time on the phone, you know, just chatting and stuff and keeping it up. I also used to talk to Jamie Rowe at the time, known as JR from Tempest. Him and his brother had Tempest. They had 2 albums out. And Jamie knew that I talked to Dave quite a bit, and he said, hey, can I get Dave's number? I really love them, and I'd like to make contact. So I asked Dave, hey, can I give Jamie your number? And he's like, sure. I gave Jamie the number. Shortly thereafter, he contacted the band. They were looking for a singer. He joins the band. So I made a love connection there. But, you know, I wasn't instrumental in him getting the gig. But, hey, I introduced him in a sense, or at least I passed the phone number along. So I was the middleman. Anyway, some credit there. But, yes, so this is the first album where he stepped in. I love the first album. It was on my list before. Love the second album. It's a totally different feel with a different singer, but they went on from this to even more greatness album after album. Fire and Love by Guardian. And when it comes to just one of the ultimate 1990s, this band to me looked the best. Their promo photos were amazing. This was the epitome of 1990s hair, wonderful images. Holy Soldier's first album, I had a demo by them before this. I knew this was going to be great. I had heard prior, you know, rumblings about it, and when this album came out, it just blew me away. It is just solid, melodic, at the time metal. People would call it hard rock now. It was just melodic metal perfection of the day. So yeah, and this was reissued on vinyl just a couple years ago. So great stuff. Glad to have it. Up next, and this fell a little. I know that their first 2 albums have been in previous lists, but King's X, Faith, Hope, Love. This was the album where lyrically I started going, what are they singing about? And musically it was a little different than the first 2 albums. I'm like, it was a change. But over time, it became one of my favorite albums. I mean, it's different, but great. Still don't understand what all the words are about. Some of the words are just kind of odd. And I'm like, what are they singing about? But musically and memorable wise, this album is just still one of my favorites. The first 3-4 albums by King's X are probably my top favorites, just because I used to spin them so long back then. So there you go. And at number 3, Weapons of Our Warfare by Deliverance. I mentioned their first album before, absolutely my favorite. Second album is probably their most popular album with people. They did a video that was on MTV from this. Just solid. There was a lineup change. It just was a very powerful album, very great 90s, early, you know, late 80s thrash. And so it has and will always remain high on the list of Deliverance's achievements. To me, the first album is one of my favorites just because the songs were with me the longest between the demos and the album. But then there's just no denying the greatness of the second one. I even recently picked it up on the picture disc reissue just because it is such a great pivotal release. I wanted to have it in both. There's a couple different vinyl pressings of this out there, and so it should still be available. I have 228 of 300. It has been repressed, I believe, after this initial 300, so there are versions out there. There you go. At number 3. At number 2, I have to include Tourniquet stopped the bleeding. We recently lost Ted Kirkpatrick, the mastermind, drummer, musician, excellent behind this. But back in the day, this album, this group, Guy Ritter on vocals, Gary Lanier on guitars, just the album blew me away. Ted's drumming blew me away. And I've told the story before that I did a magazine back. I had a magazine back in the day. I reviewed this in my magazine, and I just focused on, as a drummer myself, focused on the amazing drummer skills that were on this album. Just blew me away. And one day I got a phone call, and Ted had somehow tracked my number down. Again, this is pre-internet. Tracked my number down and called me to show his appreciation for all the kind words I said about his drumming in that review. That was just thrilling to me, because I was a little publisher of no real notoriety, and for him to somehow have not only read the article, but to then track me down a call. That was just great. Ted was a great guy in that aspect. This album still, people say it sounds like King Diamond because Guy's vocals are falsetto and everything. I had never listened to King Diamond at the time, so didn't have that comparison, but that's what they compared this to. They compared it so much to that when they came up with the second album, he stopped singing like that, much to my dismay. He had a little bit of it in there, but not as much as this album. This album still is blistering great. There was that's a repress later. This is an earlier repress of the remastered edition that the band put out, and then this one came out a couple years ago with the original cover. They just updated the cover a little bit. So it's so good, I had to have it twice. Number one, Stryper, Against the Law. The one Stryper album that for the longest time they kind of didn't like, because, you know, they kind of changed. They got rid of the yellow and black. They kind of went secular. They went mainstream. They were trying, you know, there's a lot of bad a lot of bad mojo around this album that people love it or hate it. They didn't like the change. They didn't like the lyrical direction. One of their most powerful albums of that decades of time, and I still love it to this day. Every song on this album I think is just great. They, you know, even the cover tune, they did a great job all around. Love this album. Had to bring it in at number one. It was tough. All the first three, the top three could easily interchange, but, you know, as a lifelong fan of Stryper, I just felt this album, you know, I think a lot of fans love it now, and so, you know, back in the day it might have got a little flack because of the, you know, change and squeaky cleanness that they went from, but it's just an amazing album from an amazing band, and it's at number one. So there you go. That's it for this one. I will be back. I'll be starting to put together a 91 list and see where we go from there. Thanks a lot for watching. Rock on and rock hard.